multiple forms across multiple silos in multiple states. In the month of September, 3 farm bills were passed in the parliament and later assented by the president to now qualify them as acts. Namely, the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services Act of 2020. Secondly, the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act of 2020. And thirdly, the Essential Commodities Amendment Act of 2020, which repealed the Essential Commodities Amendment Ordinance promulgated in June 5th. The manner in which they were passed was quite controversial, and the legislations have received a substantial amount of opposition. While the possibility that these legislative exercises are an example of such censorship is not dismissed, this webinar also considers the legislations in their best case, whereby the means employed to dispense of these legislations may be justified by the ends that they intend on achieving, or that the means employed in themselves may be constitutionally valid. Therefore, the Public Policy and Governance Committee of Christ deemed to be University and the Public Policy Group of National Academy of Legal Studies and Research, or Nalsar, have collaborated to host a webinar on understanding the agrarian crisis in 2020, which would be dealing with a substantive portion of these legislations, while also paying heed to the other important issues within the agrarian crisis that have not been receiving the adequate media coverage that they rightfully deserve. On that perceivably dark note, we thank all of you for taking the time out to attend this session on a Saturday, and we welcome all of you. I am Sundar PL, the co-convener of the Public Policy and Governance Committee of Christ deemed to be University, and I will be your MC for the day. Our moderator for the day would be Dr. Sapna S., the head of Department of School of Law, Christ deemed to be University. We welcome you, ma'am. Our panelists in order of their speeches would be Professor Ramakumar, Dr. Soma KP, and Mr. Kiran Kumar Vissa. We welcome all of you. Professor Ramakumar has procured an MSc in Agricultural Economics from TNAU and a PhD in Economics from Indian Statistical Institute of Kolkata. He has been a NABARD Chair Professor of School of Development Studies under Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai since June 2016. He was an assistant professor at the institution from 2006 to 2010, an associate professor from 2010 to 2013, and a professor at the institution ever since 2013. He has been a non-ministerial member of the State Planning Board under the Government of Kerala from 2016 to 2021. He has been a visiting scholar at the Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum from 2005 to 2006. He has been a visiting postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Economic Studies in Mexico City in 2004. His overall areas of interest are agrarian studies, agricultural economics, development economics, Indian economy, and national identity schemes. His current research focuses on agriculture, agrarian change in rural India, agricultural credit, economic reforms, and changes in rural livelihoods. It's a privilege to have you here, Professor. Dr. Soma Kishore Pathasarathi is an independent researcher, analyst, advisor, and coordinator of gender livelihoods initiatives. They currently coordinate the National Network for Women's Farmers at Makam and provide gender analysis and advisory services on forest rights issues with community forest rights learning and advocacy at CFR LA. They facilitate and undertake research and action programs related to gender, natural resources, and livelihoods. They have worked intensively with climate change and development from an inclusion, equity, and gender lens as an independent researcher and consultant. They have worked with the Government of India and Planning Commission for policy formulation, policy analysis, organizational strategies, and gender sensitization. They have undertaken national program evaluations for poverty alleviation and inclusion, and education and empowerment strategies. Their niche areas of interest lie in research and program initiatives related to sustainable development, climate resilience and adaptation, gender livelihoods, land rights, and the commons. It's an honor to have you here, Dr. Soma. She'll be joining us shortly. Mr. Kiran Kumar Vissa was a key figure at Association for India's Development, or AID, since its formative years. He is the co-founder of Raitu Swarajya Vedika, which is an organization that works for sustainable livelihoods for agricultural communities in Andhra Pradesh and is a part of a nationwide alliance for sustainable and holistic agriculture. They work intensively to uphold rights of small and marginal farmers, and he's an active member of the All India Kisan Sangharsh Coordinating Committee. He is based in Andhra Pradesh, devoting his full time to social issues. His focus interests have been agriculture and farmers' issues, consumer awareness on food, volunteer mobilization, and citizen activism. He has participated in the Narmada struggle, anti-communalism campaigns, and other human rights campaigns. He holds a BTech from IIT, Chennai, and MS from University of Maryland. It's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Kiran Vissa. I now invite Dr. Sapna S. to moderate the session and the panelists to enlighten us.
Thank you so much, Sundar. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to the Dean, School of Law, Christ Deemed to be University, Dr. Jaidevan S. Nair, to the department coordinators, Dr. Fincy, Dr. Shampa, Dr. Sunita, Dr. Achyutananda Mishra, to the committee which has taken up this panel today and which has organized, which is much the need of the hour, and then to the public policy group of the National Academy of Law Studies and Research, Nalsar, to my dear colleagues in the School of Law, and to all the other invitees who are present here today. I'll just take a moment to just quickly introduce everybody onto the panel, to invite everybody onto the panel, after which I could unmute my video. I'm just having a little technical glitch. So I will just, start being invisible for just some time now. The first thing is that let me warmly invite onto the panel Professor R. Ramakumar, Dr. Soma KP, Mr. Kiran Kumar Vissa. And when I was just hearing the CVs of the panelists being read out, as we have always seen and as we have always heard, a panel is as good as the panelists that make the panel. It could not have been a more diverse panel than this, such a power-packed panel. And what we're going to have a huge look forward to is the kind of the perspectives that each one of the panelists could be giving to us. And what particularly interests me as a gender specialist is definitely from Dr. Soma KP, who's going to be telling us about, how gender is going to play a part in all these things. After the formal introduction, which has already been given by the student convener of the committee, Mr. Sundar, I invite each one of you onto the panel. And before that, very quickly, if we have to look at why we think it is the need of the hour, the bills became acts amidst huge opposition from different parts of the country. Each one of us have been aware of it and has been a witness to that. Now, at least from my side, the point is that the way that these bills have been proposed and the way that the acts propose in it, will it really give the private farmers a boost through the open market system that it proposes? At least is something that interests me. And I'm sure during the course of the deliberations, the panelists will throw light on this. Now, secondly, the contract farming that it proposes in the second part of it. Of course, we understand that there is nothing new about it. But the national level framework that it is giving, what is the kind of the implication that it is going to have? And the third thing that, at least from my side, that interests me is that in the, when they have pulled out cereals from the essential commodities, cereals, pulses, potatoes, from onions from the essential commodities, what is the kind of the implication that the government actually, think of? And what is the kind of the implication that it could actually have? At least with this, I'm sure we're going to be starting with the deliberations. I invite on the first speaker, Professor R. Ramakumar. Extending my gratitude to you, Professor R. Ramakumar, I invite you on to the panel. And we are going to be having about 30 minutes of presentation by Professor R. Ramakumar. And then we're going to be having the other two speakers. After that, it's going to be an interaction where we could take questions. Professor R. Ramakumar, over to you. And I invite you on to the panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sapna, and the organizers of the event for having invited me as a speaker at this panel. I have about 30 minutes and I shall make my point in concise terms as to what I think about the three farm acts. Now, to begin with, I must begin this discussion from a particular historical context. And that's the context of the 1960s in India, where India started off a new path in terms of the agricultural policy that it was following till then. The whole Green Revolution package came into being in the 1960s. often it is thought that the Green Revolution package is was purely a technological package alone. And usually the complementary institutional features associated with the Green Revolution package goes underappreciated. So if you look at that package from the 1960s onwards, you will see that there were many kinds of institutional support which was offered to the farmers from the 1960s onward. There were supports in terms of prices, there were supports in terms of subsidies, there were supports in terms of credit, there were supports in terms of marketing, in terms of research, in terms of extension, and so on and so forth. So there were different types of institutional support measures erected by the government to assist the farmers during the Green Revolution package, to incentivize them to adopt the new technologies and so on. I shall refer to only two of them here because that's what is relevant for the discussion on farm bills and farm acts rather. The first is the support related to prices and the price policy of that time. So the agricultural price policy of that from that time onwards have looked at two ends of the spectrum: the producer and the consumer. The producer wants a higher price. The consumer wants a affordable lower price. How do you meet the needs of both producers and consumers whose objectives appear to be irreconcilable because they run in opposite directions? That was done through the institution of the national food policy of that time, where you instituted procurement of produce from the farmers on the one hand and distribution through a series of ration shops or the public distribution system on the other. So the farmers were offered a better price through the procurement price and the support price mechanism that was announced at that time. For this, the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices, then called as APC, Agricultural Price Commission, was established in 1965. Based on this price, the Food Corporation of India, again established in 1965, would actually procure food grains from different parts, the different surplus states of the country, and it would be transported to the deficit states of the country for distribution. Now, there is going to be a clear difference in prices at which the farmer is paid and the consumer has to pay. This difference is met by the government in terms of the food subsidy directly from the budget. So this was the essence of the national food policy from that time onwards, where the consumer's interest and the consumer's interest, where the producer's interest and the consumer's interest were met together by the introduction of a food subsidy allocation from the government's budget itself. So that is one very important institutional intervention of the government in India from the 1960s onwards. That gave a good price to the farmer, that gave a remunerative price to the farmer, that reduced the kinds of price fluctuations the farmer was subjected to in the period prior to it, and that was a very important gain to the farming community. The second important intervention of that time was related to agricultural marketing. Prior to 1960s, the farmers of India. Can you please mute? Yeah. Prior to 1960s, the farmers largely had to sell to itinerant traders in the village market itself, in the village. Most of these exploitative, they never gave the farmer a good price. They often forged the weights and measures that were used to collect the farmer's produce. They never gave accurate price information to the farmer as to what would be the market conditions in the coming days or coming weeks and so on. So the farmer was largely in the dark about market conditions. He was denied a remunerative price. He was often cheated using wrong weights and measures, etc. So this meant that there was this discussion about beginning markets in the rural areas, which would be, to use a term used in the 1960s, which would be a bullock cart distance from the farmer. So about 5 kilometers or 6 kilometers from every village, that radius drawn from every village, there should be one market. Thus, the APMC markets were sought to be introduced from the 1960s, Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee markets. Now, these markets, it was well appreciated at that time that this is a state subject. Agriculture is a state subject under entry 14 of the state list of the Constitution. Also, all the agricultural trade-related issues are also state issues according to entry 26, 27, and 28 of the state list of the Constitution. So, central government did not pass any legislation on this. Instead, states, whenever they wanted, passed Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee Acts, APMC Acts, in their state legislative assemblies from 1960s onwards. This establishment of what are called in different places as either regulated markets or mandis or simply APMC markets, all these were wholesale markets where farmer could actually walk in and get the best price available through a series of market mechanisms that were laid out in the market rules. So there could be auctioning of the product, or there could be multiple types of selling procedures which would give the farmer a price. When the farmer enters the market, there would be the price that would be displayed in the mandi prominently visible to everybody. The farmer can actually get also information about the market conditions of that commodity, and if necessary, the farmer could stay in a guest house attached to the APMC market to take advantage of a potential higher price the next day or the day after. So these facilities, now all the weights and measures were standardized. So all these measures meant that the balance of power was tilted from the side of the trader to the side of the farmer, not to a great extent, but to a substantial extent from the 1960s onwards, thanks to the intervention or thanks to the institution of the APMC markets in the rural areas. So this also gave the farmer enormous amount of security in terms of price and market during the Green Revolution period and after. This was the history of the two interventions from the 1960s. However, by the time of the 1990s, when the whole liberalization agenda came in for discussion in India and abroad, the agricultural policy that was followed in India from the 1960s came in for sharp criticism. It was argued that the farmer in India is actually being denied a good price, denied a higher price because of the interventions that I just outlined a while back. The reason is that it was argued by a set of economists of the neoliberal genre that the farmer, because of the institution of the procurement price or the support price, is unable to take full advantage of the prices in the market. And that market can be the domestic market and also the export market. In both cases, it was argued that the prices are higher than the prices that are announced by or administered by the government, like this MSP or the procurement price. Instead, because if the farmer is completely freed from these MSP systems and the procurement systems, then the farmer will be free to sell the commodity in the open market or even export it to outside the country and take advantage of the higher price. This was one art. So what should be done? You should actually downscale the procurement system, de-emphasize the MSP system, reduce procurement, probably downscale the activities of Food Corporation of India, and thus leave a lot of commodities which were earlier procured through the government system into the open market, so that farmer could take a call on what kind of price, what is the price at which he or she would want to sell it. So this was one set of arguments that came out by the early 1990s. Downscale procurement. Even there were some people who even argued the Food Corporation of India should be simply dismantled. And the food subsidy is actually a fiscal burden on the government. The government is not an efficient player in the market. It should give way to the private sector, allow futures markets to come in, allow private markets to come in, allow the private sector to keep inventories, drain inventories as and when it is required, to import or export as and when it feels fit. Arguments were raised in the 1990s and the beginning of the 1990s, which primarily meant that the whole system of price support, which was built from the 1960s onwards, came in for a sharp attack from both inside India, from the neoliberal establishment, and from international organizations like the World Bank and so on. So this meant that people came to argue that MSPs can be retained. Nobody's saying no MSP, but MSPs need to be retained only for keeping or collecting a very small amount of buffer stocks that might be necessary for you during a famine situation or a drought situation and so on, and nothing more than that. The second attack was on the second institutional arrangement that I outlined a while back, which is the APMC system. Here again, there's a particular context that I should mention, which is that it was argued by the 1990s by a lot, the same set of economists and international organizations, that India's cropping pattern has been locked into a particular rice-wheat complex. And because of this locking into a rice-wheat complex, the farmer is unable to get a good price by cultivating high-value crops, which could even be exported outside India. So the idea was to popularize, to de-emphasize on the rice-wheat dominance in the cropping pattern. And these economists and organizations argued that if the Indian farmer is incentivized to diversify their cropping pattern into more high value, capital intensive, export oriented crops like fruits and vegetables, then it's much more profitable to the farmer and much more income earning to the farmer. So this was the point which was put out. So the cultivation of high value export oriented crops like fruits and vegetables should be popularized among the farmers. Now, it was also alongside this that the cultivation of fruits and vegetables on the scale that I just mentioned will not be possible given the current agrarian structure, that is predominance of small and marginal farms. You actually need large farms. You actually need economies of scale. As a result, there are two issues that come up. One is that if you want to allow a corporate firm to actually come in, lease large amounts of land from farmers, small and marginal farmers, and put together about 400 acres or 500 acres of a plot to cultivate fruits and vegetables with using modern methods of cultivation and probably export it directly from the farm. This means that the land reform laws of each state, which set ceilings on land that could be owned or possessed. This actually stands as a hindrance to the operation of the idea of corporate farming that I just mentioned. That is corporate firms coming in directly, leasing and buying from farmers, putting together a large plot and cultivating using modern methods. This this is constrained by the presence of land reform laws in states. So the argument was land reform laws also should be amended and the ceiling provisions should be diluted and farmers or companies should be allowed to cultivate, lease in as much land as they would like to. This is the idea of corporate farming that was thought to be popularized. Alongside, another idea was popularized, which was called contract farming. It must be emphasized that it is different from corporate farming. Contract farming envisages not direct cultivation by the corporate, but it envisages only the leasing in, not even leasing in of the land. It basically envisages only a contract between the farmer and the sponsor or the company which comes in. Basically here, the contract is signed between the sponsor, the company, and the farmer for the exchange of a predetermined quantity, of a predetermined quality, of a predetermined grade of the produce at a predetermined price of the produce. All these are companies a contract with the farmer to collect as much as the quantity as is cited in the contract later in the harvest season, and this is actually useful to the farmer because this gives enormous amount of assurance of a price to the farmer even before the sowing starts, and this will also allow some amount of aggregation to happen quickly in the rural areas because small and marginal farmers are getting an assured market here because somebody is coming and signing a contract with them and collecting the good also from their farm. So this was called contract farming. However, in order to have this kind of contract farming in practice, the APMC acts which are passed in each state stands as an obstruction because each APMC has got a notified area. This notified area means this is fully under the jurisdiction of the APMC, and any other marketing activity in the same jurisdiction would require prior approval of the APMC and even payment of the mandi tax to the APMC. This would disincentivize the coming in of private companies into the villages and sign such contracts with the farmers. This also meant that the argument came that these laws also should be amended, and freedom should be given for any private company to come in and buy directly from the farmer. So this was the second demand. So the whole marketing architecture came under attack from multiple quarters. The price policy came under attack, procurement came under attack, PDS came under attack, because if you don't procure that much, you also don't that much of grains to be distributed in the PDS. So you can convert the PDS from universal system into targeted system. That's how the APL BPL system came much later in 1997. Then the APMC system came under attack. In land reform laws came under attack. So liberalization meant that many of the institutional features of Indian agriculture from the time of independence came under sharp attack. And this context of the government putting in the 2003 Model Act on Agricultural Marketing, which was sent to the states by the center to reform their APMC acts in that model. This itself is an admission. That the center did not consider it their jurisdiction. Right? The center did not pass the 2003 Model Act in the parliament. It sent it to the states to be passed in the state legislative assemblies. Now, that was a good federal practice, in fact, because it was as the constitution demanded. Some states did pass parts of it, some states did not, so it's a mixed record. In 2016, 17, particularly in 17 and 18, two more acts were introduced by the government as model acts, one on contract farming and one on APMC acts. And this was again given to the states, sent to the states. And even the Union Finance Commission threatened the states that if you don't pass these amendments in the state assembly, then we will actually not give you some amount of funding. Even then, all states did not pass it. Only some states passed parts of it. No state passed any of these laws, 2003, 17, 18 acts in total in India. So thus came the COVID crisis of 2020, and the center took it upon itself to implement these acts at the central level itself, bypassing the states. For this, it invoked what is called as Entry 33 in the concurrent list of the Constitution. Even though Entry 14 is an exclusively state subject, makes agriculture an exclusively state subject, Entry 26 and 27 of the state list of the Constitution is given as it is subject to Entry 33 in the concurrent list, where the center can actually interfere in intrastate trade also. It was a very specific constitutional amendment, the third amendment of the Constitution in 1954, which inserted this Entry 33 into the concurrent list. But the central government, decided to invoke this Entry 33 in a completely dubious manner, and decided to pass it as an ordinance first at the central level, and later pass it in September as the Farm Acts of the Parliament. What do these acts do is very clear to you. Basically, the APMC Act, APMC Bypass Act, as it is often called, it basically allows any private market to be established anywhere outside the APMC compound without any permission or approval or payment of tax to the APMC mandi. That is what the APMC Bypass Act primarily envisages. The second act, contract farming, is actually a regulatory act. It's supposed to be a regulatory act. It is supposed to regulate contract farming in India by providing a certain regulatory framework to the contract farming practices, which are already in practice in different parts of India. The third, which is the amendment to the Essential Commodities Act of 1955, is actually something that takes away all the stock limits for traders in India. It is argued that this will actually encourage private investment in storage and warehousing in India, because anybody can store as much as they want now without any stock limit, and this will actually incentivize private companies to come and invest in storage and warehousing. So this is the context of the three acts that were passed by the Parliament. I shall take some of the basic arguments, claims made, and I shall examine them in the remaining 10 or 15 minutes that I have. To begin with, the argument that is raised is, will it provide the farmers more freedom to sell their produce? That's because that's the first claim that is raised. My answer is, this freedom already exists for the farmer in India, which is often underappreciated or ignored. If you look at the government data, NSSO data, National Sample Survey Organization data, about 29% of the only 29% of the paddy farmers of India sell their produce in a mandi. Only 44% of the wheat farmers sell it to a mandi. Only 39% of maize farmers sell it to a mandi. In fact, in all these crops that I'm mentioning, 41% of the paddy farmers sell their produce to a trader in the village itself. 29% of the wheat farmers sell it to a trader in the village itself. 46% of the maize farmers sell it to a trader in the village itself. And they sell it to the trader who gives them a best price. Now, so it is a wrong argument to say that the APMC markets enjoy some kind of a brutal monopoly in the marketing of agricultural produce. In fact, the extent of number of farmers who sell it to the mandi are actually only about 1/3 or 40% of the farmers that we are talking about. The rest actually sell it to the village itself to a private trader. So that freedom already exists for the farmer. There's a reason for it. That is because many of these farmers are small and marginal farmers, and their surplus is so small that they do not have the capacity, the financial capacity to actually incur a transport cost on top of it and take it to the nearest mandi, which is actually quite far away. So this meant that the farmers find it more profitable to sell their small surplus in the village itself to a village trader. That is the reason why this happens. And the trader who is purchasing from the farmer in small quantities acts as an aggregator in the village level, and he actually probably goes and sells it in the mandi later. But the farmer does not go to the mandi, he sells it to the trader first. So that freedom already exists to the farmer. It is a wrong argument to say that they are in some form locked into the mandi system in any form. The second point that I want to make in this context is related to the situation that already exists. That is, if you look at the official documents of the central government, you will see that 18 states of India have already amended their APMC acts to allow for the establishment of private market yards or private markets managed by a person other than the APMC. But they already passed these laws consequent to the Model Act brought out by the central government. Another 19 states have already amended their APMC acts to allow for the direct purchase of agricultural produce from the farmers. Another 13 states have already amended their APMC acts to establish farmers' markets managed by a person other than APMC. 20 states have amended their APMC acts to allow for contract farming. 14 states have amended their APMC acts to facilitate a single point levy of market fees. 13 states have amended their APMC acts to allow for single registration or license for trade or transaction in more than one market in the state. Right? So this is already existing in many. Contract farming exists. Establishment of private markets is allowed in many states. The establishment of the sale out in any market outside the APMC is also allowed in many states. So these freedoms have already been provided to the agricultural sector, to the private sector in agriculture in many states in India. However, none of these have resulted in any major inflow of private investment into agricultural marketing. No major private markets have come. Look at Bihar from 2006, which annulled its act in that year. No, in the 15 years have passed, almost no private investment has come. In fact, Bihar has moved from a fairly functioning regulated system in the past to a completely malfunctioning, unregulated system today. So it's a movement from regulation to lack of regulation that has happened in Bihar. Maharashtra, it denotified fruits and vegetables from the APMC markets in 2016. Very little private investment has come into markets in Maharashtra. Also after that, it has come, but very little has come. It's just a trickle. And the point is, these have already happened in states where these reforms have happened. So there was no need for a central act of this sort to bypass the states unconstitutionally and create this kind of a new architecture in marketing. In fact, that's the second question that comes in, because the question is often raised as to, does that mean that you want the APMCs to continue as they are functioning now? Hardly. That's not the point at all. In fact, many of us are big votaries of reforms that are needed in the APMC markets. You actually need reforms in the APMC markets to reduce mandi tax where possible, to reduce the number of commission agents if possible, to introduce unified licenses for traders to trade across APMCs, to connect all these mandis to e-mandis in the national level. All those should be done to create one nation, one market, whatever is necessary. But to sort of seek to weaken this APMC market system in order to bring in private markets is what the primary problem is with this new Farm Act. I'll come to the second claim made, which is, so I just examined the claim of whether have more freedom to sell their produce. The second point is, will the farmers get a better price? Unfortunately, I don't think that will happen, because that currently to the agricultural mandis that we have in different states. The argument is that if mandi taxes move away, are removed, all these mandi taxes of 5% or 6% as in Punjab will actually accrue as a higher price to the farmer. Right? That's the argument. In my view, it's a very simplistic argument, because it completely misunderstands the economics of the system. If the APMC mandi goes, or the mandi tax goes, who will come in its place? Who is supposed to come in its place? The private market. What will the private market do? It will have to go down to the village, it will have to procure from each and every farmer, and it will have to incur significant transaction costs in this whole process. It will have to set up offices in rural areas, villages. It will have to employ staff in the collection centers. It will have loading, unloading charges. It will have transport costs, storage costs, market costs. All these costs will be there as transaction costs, which would be equal to, if not more than, the mandi tax incurred in many states. So the mandi taxes will be simply replaced by high levels of transaction costs of these private markets. And as a result, these markets are either unlikely to be established, or it's quite possible that private markets, no private investment comes into this sector. In fact, this is exactly what you see in many states where these reforms have already taken place. Wherever no private investment into agricultural marketing, studies have shown that it is the presence of high levels of transaction costs that prevents the private trader or private markets to come and establish shop in rural areas. As a result, what you will have is, if the private markets do not come, and if the APMC markets have been weakened, there is likely to be a system of anarchy or chaos, or a kind of a vacuum that is created in the agricultural marketing system. That is a real danger that I see here. I do not see any major private investment coming in, but I also see a weakening of the APMC mandis happening alongside. Coming together of both is disaster to the rural marketing system, because there will neither be the old nor a new thing that will replace it. This will create anarchy, chaos, the proliferation of unregulated traders, and the complete absence of any price security to the farmer in this whole process. That is, I think, a very important problem. In Punjab and all, there is another problem, which is about 4,000 crore is collected as mandi tax by the mandi board. Now, often it is argued that this mandi tax is a villain of sorts, that it is a waste of money. Somebody is actually usurping this money, and so on. That is a complete lie. The mandi tax is actually used by the Punjab government for a rural development fund, which is used to construct and maintain rural roads crisscrossing Punjab, because there are a lot of APMC markets there. So the whole rural road network of Punjab, states like Punjab, is actually maintained using the mandi tax collected by the mandi board, which will be completely lost. Who will replace that 4,000 crore for the Punjab government? How will rural roads be constructed and maintained in the future? That's a very important developmental question that is being raised in Punjab, alongside the absence of a good price, which will probably result in the aftermath of these laws. Third point is, middlemen will be eliminated. That is another point raised. Will middlemen be eliminated? My point is, there is no reason to be to consider the middleman as a villain. In a country where geographically your production is unequally distributed, there will be a middleman. Even if you liberalize the whole, still be a middleman who will replace the current existing mandis or commission agents or arhatiyas that you may have in the rural areas. Middlemen are not all villains. They will be required, and there will be middlemen even when the private markets end up taking over. And these middlemen who take over as part of these private markets, because private agencies outsource a lot of their activities to smaller companies or smaller firms, and this outsourcing itself will create a lot of costs and margins in the value chain, and this will be the new middleman who will be replacing the old commission agent. So I do not think the middleman will disappear. There'll be a middleman probably existing with a new name and with the same amount of cost and margins. So this claim is also unfounded in my view. There is a very important point to be mentioned, which is that in this case, a lot of if the farmer is actually organized in the form of cooperatives or in the form of farmer producer companies and so on, there is a great advantage to the farmer. In that case, the farmer benefits from the whole process like this. But that coming in a farmer producer companies will require enormous amount of social organization in the villages, which I do not think the current political regime in any of the states outside maybe a state like Kerala is equipped to do that. So I do not think that will also happen on a mass scale, though NABARD and all is trying a lot. I don't think that will also happen. This is why we needed to treat the internal reform of the APMCs as a priority. Unfortunately, we have not done that. Let me quickly come to the second act, and I will close my comments there, which is related to the contract farming. Now, as I said earlier, the contract farming system is that the farmer gets an assured price. Right? The farmer is assured of a price 3 months, 4 months down the line, and that price security to the farmer is very important. But at the same time, the problem is it doesn't end. The story doesn't end there. There's also enormous amount of breach of contracts that occur as part of the contract farming system in India. So the company signs a contract with the farmer saying that I'll buy it from you at about 10 rupees per kg at the harvest time. But the harvest time comes, the market price is 7 rupees per kg, and the company finds it more profitable to go to the open market and buy and breach the contract rather than pay the farmer a higher 10 rupees per kilogram. So that he doesn't go and buy from the farmer. As a result, what happens is the farmer is left in the lurch. The point could be raised, the farmer can seek legal redress. But you know the legal prowess of the company will be such that the farmer will stand very little chance of succeeding or fighting a prolonged legal battle with the company, because the company will use its battery of lawyers to argue that the man gave us damaged produce, which was not according to the quality that we had agreed to in the contract, and hence we were forced to reject it. And that sometimes stands in a court of law at times. Second is, many of these contract farming systems are violative of a lot of sustainable farming practices that are practiced across India. Third is, a lot of these contract farming practices encourage a kind of cropping pattern in rural areas that runs counter to national food security interests. Right? That is a third point that is often found in contract farming contracts. Fourth is, in a lot of these cases, because of enormous mechanization that sometimes results or accompanies contract farming, there's some amount of labor displacement that happens at the farm level, which creates more amount of rural unemployment. Finally, in many contract farming cases, child labor is used in a large way. Very low-waged female workers are also employed in a big way to cut costs enormously at the not just at the margin but at the core itself, in order to ensure that the market can be the produce can be sold at a higher price. All these are practices that are seen to be prevalent alongside contract farming across the world and in wherever you have seen it in India. This means that you need a better regulation farming system, and that in that sense the contract farming act, the act related to contract farming, is welcome. But the question to be asked is, does it provide the correct good regulation, or is it actually bad regulation? In my view, it is bad regulation. In my view, it is bad regulation because I think that there were 2 or 3 things which should have been taken care of in this whole process. One, the farmer's interest should be kept supreme in all these contract farming arrangements. How is it to be done? Either it could be done in the form of a third party signing the contract with the farmer and the donor. That could be the local government or government agency which comes in, and this would mean that the company would be disincentivized from breaching the contract or because of any market condition that obtains at the harvesting season. That's one probable point that could have been written into the act, which has not been done. Second is, you basically need a completely new design for contract farming in India, where you discourage individual contracts, not ban, but discourage individual contracts and encourage more of group contracts, group of farmers, cooperatives, FPCs, etc., going and signing a contract with the company, where the bargaining power of the farmer will be much more in that sense compared to an individual contract. This should have been written into the Act in some form, other than implicitly allowing it, behind some of the legalese of the Act. So this is extremely important. And more importantly, the farmer can also be considered as a consumer. The March 2020 judgment of the Supreme Court of India, which is called the Ambika Devi versus Nandan Biometrics, which was a case based on a Safed Musli farmer called Ambika Devi in the Kozhikode district of Kerala. The ruling of the Supreme Court mentions that the farmer is not simply a member in a commercial contract, but it is the farmer in all contract farming cases, being the disadvantaged party, is actually also can be treated as a consumer under the Consumer Disputes Act of 1986. Now, that creates a completely different ball game in front of us, but none of these possibilities to the farmer are actually available or can be obtained by the farmer, or can be availed of by the farmer in these new farm acts. So I think contract farming regulation, which is it is an extremely poor, badly drafted regulation, and it could have been a lot more farmer friendly as it turned out to be. I will speak about only these two acts, and I had 2 points to make about the Essential Commodities Act as well, but because my time is coming to an end, I must close here. I have spoken about the 2 acts, but I'll be happy to answer any questions on the Essential Commodities Act as well, which I'm not going into because of lack of time. Thank you very much.
Professor Ramakumar, thank you so much. You laid threadbare everything that was there for the 3 acts of the Farmers Acts. But there was this one very relevant thing that you spoke about, where you said that, you look at it as a not a very good regulation, but it is more about a bad regulation. So were you trying to say that when you said it was not a good regulation, was it because it had to require a little more regulation? I mean, did it require more regulation? Is that what you think that will help?
Look, my point was this, that contract farming is an already existing practice in India, number 1. Number 2 is contract farming is currently completely unregulated, right? So anything goes under contract farming. So it is always good that it is regulated. A regulation was necessary. And in that sense, I welcome. However, what is the problem here is that I do not think it is a good regulation. I do not think it is a farmer-friendly regulation. That's the point I was trying to make. It also does not consider a lot of the new judgments that have come from the Supreme Court. For example, the consideration of the farmer as a consumer, such incorporation of such elements into the could have made it much more farmer friendly, because the farmer could have can simply go to the consumer redressal forum, which is much more easier to the farmer than approaching from a civil court, right? In this case, if you look at the act, you will see that the complaint will first go to the collector, and from there it'll go to another body. From there it'll go to an appellate thing, and then it'll go to the collector, and so on. The company will zoom through these stages easily, because it would actually want all these stages to be exhausted quickly, so that it can always challenge it later in a higher court, right? So the presence of these appellate bodies between the farmer and the civil court doesn't make it easy for the farmer, because the company would actually it doesn't care whether it lost the case in these. Yes, it would actually move to the court quickly, where more legal language will rule rather than these appellate bodies. So there, I think a lot more could have been done to provide the farmer with a system of redressal, which is much more friendly, much more cheap, and much more easier to access for the farmer. That is the point I was mentioning. So that is just one element of it. I also don't think that all kinds of things, all kinds of concerns related to contract farming are covered by this legislation. Like, for example, food security concerns, or sustainability concerns, or labor concerns. None of this is actually quite dealt with in the ambit of this legislation. So all those are drawbacks. But I also think it is a bad regulation as it has been passed. That's the point I was trying to emphasize in my
Yes, Professor
intervention.
Ramakumar, thank you so much. But I will come back to you with another question that is, kind of lurking in my mind. So, when we speak about this regulation, are we trying to say that it is a less intervention or more intervention from the government side? And why is there this deficit of trust with the farmers?
See, the point is, I think the intervention of the government should be optimal. The intervention of the government should not be overarching. The intervention of the government should also not be completely hands-off. I think it has to be an optimal regulation. That optimal regulation should allow the farmers certain amount of freedom and autonomy to choose the crop, choose the system of farming, etc., while at the same time restraining or disincentivizing the company from breaching the contract. That is the point that I was trying to say. That's number one. So I'm not looking at some kind of completely interventionary state in this matter. I think some amount of optimality is necessary in this intervention. Number two, you mentioned about the lack of trust that exists between the government and the farmers. Look, that is primarily because I'm talking about both the APMC Act and the Contract Farming Act. The reason is that the farmer in India is quite rightfully so worried that the government is trying to kill the MSP system in the long run. And I think it is a well-founded fear of the farmer. I'll state three reasons for that. One is, if you look at this particular government that is currently ruling from 2014 onwards, this government from 2014 onwards has done a lot of things which erode the faith of the farmer regarding the point that the government sees the MSP as a serious or an important interventionary instrument. Okay, it has not raised the MSPs at all over the last 6 years. In fact, if you look at 2010 to 14 and 2014 to 20, two periods, you will see that the growth rate of MSPs was something like 7% to 10% to 14% during the initial time. But by the time you come to 14 to 20, that comes down to about 5% or 6% per year, and not more than that. In fact, for the COVID year, the paddy prices, procurement prices were raised only by 2.9%. The wheat procurement prices were raised by 2.6%, which was the lowest growth rate for over a decade in India. Okay, so that's one reason. The farmer doesn't believe that the government wants to raise MSPs, and because the spokespersons of the government have said again and again that we fear that MSPs, if they are raised, they will lead to inflation in the economy. Number one. Number two is the government has also claimed that it has implemented the Swaminathan formula of cost of production plus 50% as MSP. In fact, that's wrong, because the farmer knows it, because the cost that the government has taken to add 50% on top of it is actually a lower cost, which adds only the paid out cost plus the imputed cost of family labor, and does not take into account the imputed rent on owned land and so on. If you add all that and then compute 50% on top of it, the current MSPs will have to be raised by 300 to 400 rupees per quintal. So that's the loss that the farmer is actually suffering from, because the government has refused to implement the Swaminathan formula in its entire spirit. Right? So the government is actually claiming that it has raised it, but using a lower cost of production. So again, the farmer is suspect of the government. The third reason and last reason why I think the suspicion exists or distrust exists is primarily because the government has again and again, the CSCP has again and again recommended to the government that open-ended procurement should actually be brought to an end. In particularly Punjab, Haryana, etc. They want procurement to have a ceiling and not have an open-ended procurement. It has also been suggested by the CSCP that wherever state governments are paying a bonus on top of the MSPs, those state governments should be penalized for paying a higher MSP than what the center allows. Okay, so all these have created a certain amount of fear and distrust on the part of the farmer as to what the government of today thinks about MSPs. It doesn't trust the government at all as to whether it will retain the MSP system in the long run or not. Right? And so this is what complicates the matter. The government is completely non-transparent on this matter. It says we will continue MSP, but at the same time does not raise MSP, does not declare the correct MSP, does not procure or threatens to stop procurement in many states where procurement is already being practiced. These are the problems I feel which are which inspire or motivate a lot of these resistance movements that you see among farmers.
Thank you so much, Professor Ramakumar. I will come back to another question in the chat box, but we will take that question after we hear Dr. Soma. Dr.
Sure.
Soma, I invite you onto the panel. So can we have you speak about this for about half an hour? Can I ask Sundar, are you there? So am I following the right thread of the speakers?
Yes, ma'am. The order is correct, ma'am.
Okay. Dr. Soma, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sapnaji. It's good to be here amongst the students of Nalsar and to be addressing this August gathering. I'm really happy to be the second speaker. Invariably, people speaking on gender issues get the last slot, the tightest time slots, etc. So it speaks to the consciousness within the institution and the organizers to be able to prioritize this. I'd like to share my PPT, if I may. I've sent it to Prerna already, but I think I should be able to do it from here. Get it on, please. Give me a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, can you see the PPT?
No, ma'am. I think it'll just take a second to load. Here it is. Yeah, now we can.
Yeah, I'll just put it on slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay. Professor Ramakumar gave a very good overview of the whole issue and how these acts are really coming at a time when they were really not required. In fact, the opposite was required to strengthen the institutional frameworks that we have in a way that they can actually address the problems that the farmers themselves are raising. And the two issues that the farmers movement has been raising, I'm part of MAKAM, Mahila Kisan Adhikar Manch, and the Community Forest Rights Learning Alliance. And we have been raising the issue from MAKAM about the fact that, as well as from the AIKSCC platform, that the two primary issues which need to be addressed are those of debt, farmers' debt, and that of minimum support price. And the AIKSCC has also drafted enactments which were put up for consideration in Parliament. But in fact, these acts do not do any justice to any of the demands of the farmers and ignores many of the facts of the reality of farmers. Let me come to the facts of the reality of farmers first. As the professor before me mentioned, most of the farmers in India are small and marginal farmers. But amongst those farmers, much of the work actually being done on the farm is being done by women farmers. And when women farmers are demanding to be recognized as farmers, instead the government calls them women on the farms. Even in the celebration of the Rural Women's Day in 2017, we managed to convince the government to celebrate that day as Women Farmers' Day. But in the celebrations, they kept calling the women as Rural Women's Day, and rather than recognizing them as farmers. And this goes back to the situation that farmers, as defined in our legislative as well as in our policy perspectives, are invariably defined by the ownership of the land. And because most women in India are deprived of land, patriarchal normative structures of our society and the legal frameworks don't adequately get implemented despite the provisions of the 2005 Hindu Succession Act and many other amendments in the past and legislations. So we find because of lack of ownership, the women get deprived of the recognition also. And when most farmers are trying to produce for their families and their households, as small and marginal farmers, their biggest concern is that of livelihoods, of sustaining themselves and then being able to produce some surplus to be able to address the needs of their families, whether it is their economic needs for survival or it is their developmental needs of education and healthcare. And we find that healthcare and education are getting privatized and more expensive, whereas the income of farm households is going lower and lower because the investment and the patterns that are coming through in terms of investment through policy also are directed towards large farming, capitalized farming, rather than to sustain and establish a sustainable process of farming for the small and marginal farmers. So when most farmers have low capital resources and their investment capacities are low, and we find that the farmer suicides are also a rampant reality, much of the burden of what is happening in farmer suicide households is also being borne by women, left behind with their children to sustain the farm, the household, as well as the children's developmental needs and their own farm's needs, as well as to deal with the kind of pressure they are under, attack by the patriarchal structures which blame them for the farmers' suicide very often. And now we find that the increasing numbers of women are also reporting suicide. Whereas earlier it was not acknowledged as farmer suicide, gradually that recognition is also coming through, that many of the farmers committing suicide are in fact women, which was earlier called housewife suicides, but are now being recognized as farmer suicides. So to come to the point about what is it that we are seeing that 63% of all female workers and 75% of rural female workers are in agriculture. Most farming in India is being done by women, at least 73%. Some states even report more than 80% of the farming being done by women. Women work up to 13 hours in the peak hours, but this work is not even counted as work. As you know, as you might be aware, the entire debate about work participation rate today is talking about women not being workers, that their work participation rate is in fact falling. Whereas we recognize the fact, and we have the evidences in terms of the reality of women's lives to prove that they're doing much more work, only that work is not being remunerated, not being given an income, because it is invisible work in the household, on the farms, as well as in the backbreaking work that goes into managing the home and managing the livelihoods, such as collection of water, collection of dung and fuel wood, collection of grasses to feed the animals. And the farming system doesn't get seen as an integrated whole. It's only seen as the field where the produce has to be increased in terms of its yields. And this is the context that we find that the men are moving away from the farming and the women are coming into it in greater numbers, but not getting recognized or getting remunerated in the way that they should be. So what do women want? When we talk about women farmers and the Farm Acts, very few women have actually known that there are such acts coming. And much of the process has been a very top-down and authoritarian process of bringing in these acts. The farmers were not consulted. If farmers' bodies had been consulted, we'd have had a different kind of act. In fact, somebody very ironically in another webinar said that perhaps there has been a consultative process, but it's not been with the farmers. We definitely can see whose interests are being represented when we see agribusiness instead of farming sustainability being promoted. So the whole consultation that should have happened in Parliament and in civil society, the concerns that should have been addressed in terms of the diversity of the country, the ecological planning that is necessary to make these effective instruments for strengthening farmers' needs, all those got left by the wayside. And especially in the moment of pandemic, it gave the government a moment to at least think about what we need to do by way way of ecological processes and how we can strengthen our diversities rather than these kind of reductionist approaches which are causing these pandemics in the first instance. But all those concerns that got left by the wayside in the gutter, literally, and we find that the capitalist aggregators and the agribusiness has dominated the discourse, and the acts have very little to offer to all categories of women farmers. Farmers are indeed now in more debt than ever before. Land mortgage is increasing rather than decreasing, and there is a sense of alienation and the next generation of families, of farmers, wanting to move away simply because they don't have the means and there is no means by which they can raise the resources. Now, we know that a large number of households in rural India are actually women-headed households. Government's own estimates show that there are a large number. Our estimates show that the women-headed households are in fact increasing in number, de facto and de jure. And when this is happening, whether it is in forest areas, among commons-dependent farmers such as the nomadic pastoralists, or it is the those who are doing fish pond, fish cultivation in ponds, or it is the livestock rearers or the forest dwellers, we find that more and more the dependency on those resources is increasing, which have held them in good stead in the past, but those resources are also being snatched away from them by different policies. Now, coming to the acts that we are talking about here, in terms of the 3 farm acts, I can go into discussion about other policies later. We know that women themselves do not sell in long distances, and Professor before me said that 1/3 of the produce is being sold in the village. Much of that produce is actually produce that women may be taking to the adat or to the banya in the neighborhood and selling in small quantities to be able to get some cash flows to be able to manage their households. And that's how the marginal and small farmers economy runs, because their surpluses are not much, so they use their produce to even get themselves the salt and the tea leaves and the small needs that they need from time to time. But when they don't go long distances, they have very little access to the markets. But the APMC actually gave them a benchmark by which they could at least understand or have some information about pricing, about the kind of prices that they could even demand from the adat. And that middleman who is being blasphemized in this whole process was in fact a source of income for those women, for better or for worse, also credit at usurious rates. But that was a kind of stepping stone in the system that allowed women to market their produce when they didn't have the means of transport or access to those markets or APMCs, but to sell themselves. And very often women are not the ones who are doing the selling. It is the men in the households who will come at the time the sales have to be done and take the produce to the market. Now, what the local trader does is to give her some access to some cash flows. Now, with the private actors and especially the aggregators coming into the market, we're going to find that women have even less of a say in the kind of prices that they have. And this is our biggest fear, because it will immediately impact her household. And along with the other acts, such as the amendments to the Essential Commodities Act, which I'll come to later, all these are going to impact the kind of resources she has available in the household to address the basic needs of food security, income and nutrition security. And these long-run aggregators and capital monopolists who are likely to come in because of the kind of laws that have come in are also likely to be more exploitative, in the sense that they are likely to want to deal with the aggregators rather than with the producers themselves, especially the small and marginal. So the aggregators are likely to mop up whatever surpluses and not be giving women the kind of terms they need to sustain their households. And there's going to be a real distress in the farming community, is what we fear. The grievance system within these regimes also is so centralized and so bureaucratized that at least in the APMC, people could come and voice their grievances, check with others how things are going, have someone to talk to seek some advice somewhere. But now if the SDM and that whole process is going to be the kind of grievance system, there's going to be very little access for women who anyway are not very accustomed now. Of course, much more than earlier, they're going to check about the schemes, etc. But that is also because some efforts have been put in by women's organizations. This kind of monopolistic system is only going to create greater inequalities in the market, and the weakening of the regulatory regime is likely to impact the weakest in the chain, which is the women producers and especially the women-headed households. And instead of deregulation, what we need is actually a strengthening of the APMC regime, as Professor Ramakumar said, and access to support services, which is an essential, and recognizing women within that access to support services because they are actually managing the fields. So I'll come to the next act. May I go ahead? So,
Ma'am, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So what women are saying is that we need greater oversight rather than withdrawal of services. And by doing this kind of enactment, what the government is actually doing, what one woman told us in the during the Bandh that was held recently by the farmers' movements was, सरकार ने तो हाथ झाड़ लिए किसान और किसानी और हमारी खुशहाली से. In the sense that the government is actually withdrawing its role as the regulator, the overseer, and is now representing only the interest of the big sharks and of agribusiness so that they can mop up whatever they can by way of profits. And the profiteering has become more important than the sustainability of farming households, which is what has kept us going so far. Women farmers need a proximal market, but the oversight is also necessary to protect them from exploitation, which the APMC, or at least that regime and the systems that are come into place for better or for worse, those are what needed to be strengthened. So there we are totally in agreement with what Professor Ramakumar mentioned. So from Makam, we have a statement that we had brought out where we had highlighted some of these facts, and you can go to our website, makam.in, to look at why the women farmers have actually opposed the acts and said that what we need is much more of this kind of representational democratic processes that will bring our voices into decision making, because on us depends the survival and the livelihood of the communities. So in context of the Essential Commodities Act, they had very serious doubts about what it is that we can actually expect. The amendments actually take away the stock limits. I think this point was also mentioned earlier, from the for traders to be able to trade in these commodities. There are no time limits to what they will be limited to in terms of stocking, and the amounts are not limited. So. And that it's left to the bureaucratic. The interesting point is, whenever these new acts are coming in any of these sectors, the bureaucratic interventions have increased instead of strengthening the constitutionality of these enactments. So this is a very interesting and somehow a very insidious arrangement between the business houses and the bureaucrats is something that we are really seeing at this point. Earlier, there used to be all these conversations about there must be good bureaucrats as well as bad bureaucrats. Let's talk to the big good bureaucrats. But now we are seeing a greater alignment between the interests of the two, the market forces and the bureaucracies. So that's also an alarming trend which is going in these enactments. The other point is that by removing these items from the essential commodities list, cereals, oilseeds, onions, potatoes, etc., the implications for food security, leave alone the idea of food sovereignty, which is what we would like to see a focus on, well-being as well as nutritional and health security. We are finding that more and more emphasis is on creating a price mechanism, creating a surplus, a profiteering system based on the exploitation of farmers and their ability to consume their own produce. So what will happen? A woman in a farming household will be compelled to depend upon her produce to be able to get small immediate gains from the from sale to be able to sustain her household. She will sell some of her household even produce to be able to buy the things she needs to run her household. But tomorrow she may need to buy the same wheat or maize that she has been selling today simply because she needed the cash in hand at that time, and now she'll go to purchase when she gets some revenue from maybe her husband sending a remittance or something. When she goes, she'll have to buy the same produce at a higher price because the market deregulation process will also cause the prices to rise, is what we fear. So this kind of system that allows the market systems to make inroads further into the economy is only going to create more and more dependencies other than allowing communities to benefit from these processes. And when we have a system where 38% of our children are underage, are stunted, and 50% of pregnant women are anemic, in a country like ours, we should really be looking at strengthening the PDS, strengthening the midday meal, strengthening the access to food through the supplementary food and nutrition programs, rather than allowing the monopolies of business houses to take over the agrarian economy and stockpile and leave people to resources which they seldom are able to control themselves. We'll find greater indebtedness is what we fear. We'll find that the middlemen who are currently there will be replaced by arbitrary middlemen who don't even need to show any kind of experience or connections or linkages. Just the Aadhaar card and a citizenship is enough to become a middleman. And God knows how this system will prevail and who will take the onus to organize them in the interest of the agribusiness houses. In the third act, if we see what is it that this is the Contract Farming Act, we find that it legalizes the contract farming across the country while claiming to enable farmers to come into these arrangements related to seeds, other inputs at agreed prices. Now, how much this agreement is based on the small farmers who are compelled to give their land and their produce in contract farming arrangements is a big question mark. The other question is when communities will be told what they should cultivate and how much they should cultivate and what should be the inputs, then they have very little control over the farming systems. And the lack of education and awareness that is prevailing amongst the rural communities and difficulties in accessing the markets will leave them more and more vulnerable to the contractors. So the power dynamics at play, and I think I should wind up. I see Sapna indicating, I think, that the time is running out. So I'll try to wind up in about 2 minutes, Sapna. We see that the power dynamics of class, caste, and gender are likely to play out and creating multiple disadvantages to the woman farmer, and especially our concern is for the vulnerable woman farmer in the tribal communities, Dalit communities, landless communities, tenant farmer communities, who are seldom considered. It's always the farmer as the owner of the land and the man who's considered. But these marginal communities are the larger proportion of our farmers, and they haven't received the attention that they should actually be receiving. And the last point is, of course, about the ecological well-being. That very often agrarian, and this is my pet peeve, so I'd like to have the last word on this, that, you know, very often agribusiness tends to promote efficiency, productivity at the cost of the ecological well-being of farms, farmers, and farming systems. And when that is compromised, we know that health is compromised, we know that health expenditures are enhanced, and the chemicalized monocropping systems are not likely to benefit any of us in the long run, especially those. We have reports of cotton farmers who are experiencing new ailments for which there are no treatments, and these biodiversities destruction and new kinds of chemicalized systems coming in are only going to create more risk. The FAO is now tending to move towards an alignment with the corporate houses in its own policy framework. So these are all risks that we are going to have to deal with and raise our voices so that the marginal farmers, the interests of women farmers, and those who have actually been doing the production have a greater say in how production needs to happen, how biodiversities need to be conserved, and overall well-being can be maintained in our society. Because when conflict happens on the farm, then conflict is likely to happen in society as well. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Dr. Soma, thank you so much. Not just was it comprehensive and so powerful, but I think, it was, not to say it was an eye-opener, but what it also made us, realize is that gender vulnerability, I think, is steeping. And the Farm Act has only made it more steeper. And let us also not forget that when we look at gender, gender is not homogeneous in itself. It does intersect with caste, it intersects with age, it intersects with the urban-rural divide, the migrancy, and so many things that goes along with that. But I will come back to you with a few more questions. I have a few more questions for Professor Ramakumar also here on my chat box. But what we will do is that now I'm going to be inviting Mr. Kiran Kumar Vissa.
Sapna ji, I would have to leave because I have a class at 6. So
okay, then just 5 minutes, ma'am. I'll just see if we have a few questions for you so that we can just quickly put that questions. Yeah. Mr. Kiran Kumar, we will just, take few questions from Dr. Soma because she just needs to leave. Do the audience have any questions for Dr. Soma?
Otherwise, I'll be happy to respond to them on the mail as well. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. I think that would be very nice. I will also take your mail ID from the organizers, and I would also like to have another a small discussion with you. Just a quick question from my own self. Even during the course of the work that you did for Makam,
Hanji.
During the course of the work that you did for Makam, did you also find these kinds of intersections, particularly with with respect to the age? Because I saw one of the reports where you mentioned that you have a huge number of women who are widows and they take the additional burden of the family and taking care of their children and things like that. So have you come across any particular finding with respect to this kind of intersection? I mean, not just being women, but women having all these other kind of intersections.
Yes. Thanks for that question. When we talk about farm widows, the age can be of across the spectrum, really, because we find that the female-headed households comprise households where women have either not been married or include women who have been separated, divorced, or have been evicted out of their marital homes or are widowed. So when these women, as well as women from farm suicide households, whose husbands have committed suicide, for instance, or male members in the families have committed suicide. Now, the vulnerabilities of such farm households is much higher than the average. Some of my students did a study on the women, female-headed households in district of Rajasthan, for instance, last year, and found that such households have 1/3 the consumption of the households where there are two members earning, because the woman is having to bear the cost of the burden of production, as well as bear the cost of consumption. So she has very little by way of resources that she can invest, and therefore her land tends to get taken over by others. Even if she is owning any land, tends to get taken over by others in the name of debt to a much greater extent. And it's important to include such women in our organizational framework. And as Makam, we are a forum It's a platform where we represent women farmers' issues. So researchers, collectives, FPOs, FPO representatives are all members of this. We were formed 5 years back, and we've been working consistently in partnership with organizations such as Kiran's and trying to build up the whole process of focusing on women farmers within the debates on farmers, simply because if we don't recognize women farmers and the most vulnerable, the tribal, the Dalit, the tenant farmers, I'm sure Kiran will be talking much more about tenant farmers. They're a huge category amongst the farmer community, and they are really the ones who are the backbone of the rural economy in terms of the productivity. They have also shown that the small farms can be much more productive in terms of the kind of inputs that they can themselves raise from their own produce, provided that we invest in such processes. But those processes, the knowledge holders of seed protection, of local integrated farming systems, and managing the agri-waste for recycling in the farm itself, managing the
precisely where the sustainability comes in, isn't it?
Right,
That is precisely where the sustainability comes in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And those are the knowledge holders. And if we ignore that knowledge, then we are really cheating them out of the practices that have sustained them so long. And they don't see the farm as just the land on which the crop is cultivated. They see the connections between the forest, between the water bodies, the underground water resources, the replenishment, Keat. You know, one of the women told us in a training program where we were talking about she said, Keat nahi to kuch nahi. You know, if we don't have the little organisms within the soil that nourish and, aerate our soil, then our productivity is lost. And when we lose sight of that and we keep putting the urea and we keep putting in these chemicalized inputs, we're losing sight of what has held us together, which is the farming system. And we need to nurture both those systems in an integrated way. And this integrated vision is what is missing.
Climate change also. This has a balance with climate change. And I think that's where the sustainability is.
We can have another dialogue on that. I guess we don't have the space. But thank you so much for your question.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. That was such a brilliant session, and thank you so much. Sundar? Sundar, Dr. Soma will lead. Ma'am, just a second. Sundar, Dr. Soma will like to lead. Do you think, just a quick vote of thanks from one of you, do you think you can just, according to
formality, please don't disrupt your session.
No, I don't think you should take away that opportunity. That is such an opportunity for the students, and I think they should do that.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Soma, it's been a pleasure having you on this forum. We've experienced a lot of interdisciplinary aspects that I don't think a lot of people who've attended the session had to start off with. And the intersection between gender, environment, and the agrarian reforms in general is a very unexplored area that a lot of students need to be well furnished about. And I think you've done an extremely successful job in enlightening us about that. So I thank you so much for taking the time out to come to the session and attend it and share your perspectives regarding it.
Thank you so much.
I'll be failing in my duty if I don't put in my compliment to the committee for having chosen panelists like this. Thank you so much to the committee. Dr. Soma, thank you so much. And we will have Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be happy to interact with the students in any capacity.
Yes, thank you so much. Can I have Mr. Kiran Kumar on to the panel?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sapna. So I will, I think, get right away into the comment because already the time I think is limited. So I will try to keep my remarks to about 20-25 minutes. I will keep a presentation, and I think that many of the things I wanted to say have also been covered by Dr. Ramakumar and Dr. Soma. Right. Is my screen visible?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay. So we are talking about the 3 Agriculture Acts, I think primarily in the context of, what it means for Indian farmers. I would like, while we are going through the nitty-gritties of what the acts do or don't do, we should have the picture of small and marginal farmers in India in front of the mind's eye, at least. Where 92% of the people involved in agriculture are small and marginal farmers who own less than 5 acres of land. Many of where the women and the men and sometimes the children also help in the farms. And these families are what should be our priority when we are trying to understand and analyze these acts. Regarding the acts, I think we need to look at the three questions. Who do these acts really benefit? And why did the government bring the acts in such a hurry? And what's the larger picture of all the three acts seen together? Because they may seem like they are three different acts, but I think they actually form a part of a single larger picture. And like Professor Ramakumar and Soma ji also have brought out, the larger picture is mainly the government withdrawing from its regulatory capacity as well as its responsibility to ensure a remunerative prices and good income to farmers. It is withdrawing from that responsibility as well as a regulatory capability while throwing the door. But we will go into a little more detail to understand that. And definitely, why the government brought the acts in a hurry. The rhetoric that it has been using is basically that these acts are brought for the sake of the farmers. They are really to benefit the farmers. In fact, they have said that for the very first time in 70 years, farmers have really got freedom. India got its freedom in 1947. Farmers have got their freedom in 2020. Or this is like the 1991 moment for Indian agriculture where everything is going to bloom. So this is the kind of rhetoric that it's been using. But the fact that actually the government brought these acts in a hurry in the form of ordinance during the lockdown and so on just shows that they were not really sure of the support of the farmers or the farmer organizations. If they were sure of it, they would have actually talked about it, maybe last year when they were getting elected or soon after they got elected. The fact that they brought them in a hurry when no farmers, it becomes very difficult for farmers to protest, shows that actually they are not sure of the farmers' support. So we'll go into a little more detail about that. The reality is that actually farmers are on the roads across the country. This is a huge protest. Thousands and thousands of farmers on the road in Punjab, in Haryana. And actually states have been hit by with lockdowns and so on. Despite that, all these people are taking risks to actually come out and protest, in large numbers. There are rallies of 15,000 tractors in Punjab and so on. There is a statewide rail roko for the last 2 months in Punjab. Not only in Punjab, even in Bangalore, Karnataka, in Bhopal, in Hyderabad, in many places across the country, actually protests are taking place. These are massive protests. And even the Adivasi farmers from Maharashtra are protesting. And just on 26th and 27th, there is a huge protest that's going to happen in Delhi. There is a Delhi Chalo call for farmers across the country. And of course, in this current situation, mainly it will be farmers from the surrounding states which will go there. But there is also a Band across the country in many states protesting against these acts. So this is the reality. I mean, while the government tries to project that they are doing this for the benefit of the farmers, the reality is that the farmers are on the roads. So to understand these acts, we need to understand what actually farmers are going through. So let us look at Lalitamma. She's a farmer from Anantapur district. She's a woman farmer. This is a campaign that we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 years to highlight the fact that farmers are not getting remunerative prices. So this is something that we are calling as Kisan Ki Loot. Essentially, the farmers are getting looted in the market, both due to the to the unfair markets, as well as due to the failure of the government to keep up its promises. If you look at that banner, it has information. Of course, it's in Telugu, so it is summarized on the slide. The minimum support price, this was 2 years ago, the minimum support price for groundnut was 4,450. Whereas the government had actually promised, the Modi government had actually promised that they will provide MSP at C2 plus 50%, but they did not actually increase the MSP. If they had actually increased the MSP as per their promise, it should have been 6,134 rupees, right? But what's the actual price that the farmer is getting? Is she at least getting the 4,450? Which the government has declared as the minimum support price. So the word minimum should have some meaning, right? But the actual price that she is getting, she got was 2,600 rupees. And she is a farmer from Anantapur. She had to go all the way to Ballari to sell her produce in order to get even this 2,600 rupees price. And she sold 31. And what we calculated is that in just this season of selling her groundnut, she lost about 1,09,000 rupees compared to what is the promised MSP of the government. But even if you compare it to the actual MSP, which the government has declared, she would have lost about more than 60,000 rupees. These 31 quintals of groundnut that she sold. So this is the situation of the farmers, and that's the reason why the farmers are on the roads. Dr. Sapna, you had asked, what's the reason for the discontent?
Correct.
Point of view, what is their situation? And this is not just, the picture from 2017. I mean, this gap between the minimum support price and the actual price. These are latest figures from the end of last month for cotton in Telangana, which is where I work. You can see that the maximum price and the modal price of the, of cotton crop. There is a huge deficit between what is the minimum support price and what is what the farmers are getting, because the minimum support price for cotton is 5,825 this season, and you can see that on an average they're getting only 4,500. So there is a gap of about 1,300 rupees between the minimum support price and the actual price. When I looked at the prices in various mandis across several states, what we found is that the minimum support price of maize is 1,850, but the average market price is only around 1,300 rupees, which means a deficit of about 30%. Cotton 5,825 and 4,500. Soybean 3,880 is the MSP, and the market price is about 3,500. So everywhere in Ragi in Karnataka, about a 37% deficit. So farmers are not getting even the minimum support price, which is promised by the government, which is declared by the government officially. So why is a farmer like Lalitama not getting a fair income? Because ultimately, if the farmers, and especially small marginal farmers, have to survive, they have to get sufficient income out of all the hard work they are putting into the cultivation. We know that there is no problem with the production, because farmers have actually been producing more than sufficient for the country. And in fact, even in the lockdown period, during the first quarter of this financial year, while all the sectors actually shrunk, the GDP of the country shrunk by about 24%. The agricultural GDP increased by about 4%. The farmers are doing their job in terms of producing, even during the tough, challenging situations like the lockdown. But the is not doing justice for the farmers. So that's the situation of the farmers. So if you just get into a micro level, Lalitama farmer, why is she not able to get a fair income? Firstly, she is forced to sell crop immediately after harvest because she has no holding capacity. It means that, firstly, she doesn't have a place where she can store and, or a processing facility where she can actually, get it processed and sell it at an advantage. But also it means that she has no finance. So unless she sells after 4 or 5 months of investing continuously in the cultivation, only when she sells the crop, she gets some money in her hand. And unless she gets money in her hand, she can't repay her loans. So therefore, every farmer who is cultivating something once they harvest, they're forced to immediately sell. And minimum support price is not implemented, and especially for crops which are other than paddy and wheat. So that's a problem that we have seen, the gap between the MSP and the actual price. Then the farmers are also stuck in a dealer credit nexus. Often they don't get loans from the banks, and especially if they're tenant farmers or women farmers and so on. So about 60% of farmers in India take all their loans from private lenders. And these private lenders often happen to be the input dealers, who sell them fertilizers and pesticides, a dealer shop. And often they also happen to be the output dealers. Once the crop comes into hand, the same person who sells you pesticides also buys your cotton, right? And you're already taking loan from that person, so you're indebted. Either you take money from your landlord or you take money from the dealer. So you're forced to sell to the same dealer, so you don't have bargaining capacity. You can't say that, I demand this price. So farmer is actually losing at 3 or 4 levels. And being caught in this nexus traps the farmer in a debt trap. So that's the situation the farmer is facing. And of course, other issues like, whenever there is a disaster like the recent heavy rains, there is no help in the form of insurance or a disaster compensation. And also the support, whatever support the government gives, whether it's a crop insurance or it's PM Kisan or kind of a cash support system, it only goes to landowners or the title holders of the land, but not to the tenant farmers or to the women farmers who don't have land titles. So these are all the reasons why a farmer like Lalitama cannot get a fair income, right? So now let us see what these acts do or do not do. Here I just want to put this picture in front of you that, for example, when we are talking about the Commodities Act, like Professor Ramakumar had said, basically what the government is claiming is that the earlier system was benefiting consumers because it was trying to keep the consumer prices low. Now by removing some of this regulation, actually the agriculture sector would be benefited. This is the what the government is saying. But one thing we need to remember is that within agriculture sector, there are farmers and there is agribusiness. And something which is, which is the sector doesn't necessarily benefit farmers. It may be only benefiting the agribusiness, and often the interests of the farmers are, interests of agribusiness. There are competing interests within the agriculture sector, which we have to keep in mind when we're looking at who gains, who loses. And one more thing we need to remember is basically consumers interests need to be taken care of, the farmers' interests need to be taken care of, and both these are citizens of the country. Whereas the agri corporations are not citizens of the country, but often their interests are being placed above the interests of the farmers and the consumers, whose interests actually the government should be protecting. So this is the larger picture of who gains, who loses, which we need to keep in mind. I mean, that's basically the same thing that I'm saying in that slide. I also want to point out that the titles of the acts tell their own story, because you see that each of these acts has like a law, something for the farmers. Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion Facilitation Act, whereas actually the essence of it is an APMC Bypass Act, or maybe even Mandi Todo Kanun, as we've been saying in Hindi. And the other one which says Farmers Empowerment and Protection is actually just a Contract Farming Promotion Act. And the Essential Commodities Amendment is actually an Agribusiness Freedom to Hoard Act. So earlier the Essential Commodities Act was preventing or restricting the extent to which agribusinesses can hoard food produce, especially. Those restrictions are being removed. So it's not freedom for the farmers, but freedom for the corporates. So the fact that the government is couching these things in such titles that it's giving to the acts also shows, it tells its own story. Since Professor Ramakumar did not go into detail on the Essential Commodities Act, I'll just highlight a couple of points there. Basically, again, the rhetoric of the government says that farmers are being given additional freedom through these 3 acts. But actually, farmers did not have any restrictions under the Essential Commodities Act. Farmers always had a freedom to store how much ever they want, sell whenever they want. It was the agri-business that had restrictions on stocking, on on sales and various things. Basically, when I say that they had restrictions, what I mean is the government had the capacity to place restrictions. It's not that there were always a heavy restrictions. For example, in 2016, under the current Essential Commodities Act, also the government issued a GO. Which I quoted here in 2016, which basically exempts many of the food commodities from restriction under the Essential Commodities Act. However, whenever the need arises, they do have the right, the power, during the lockdown period also, to make sure that there was no runaway inflation. So this was the situation before the Essential Commodities Act amendment. So what did the amendment do? Basically, it says that the foodstuffs, whatever is called foodstuffs, is exempt from any kind of restrictions on stocking and other things under the Essential Commodities Act, except in extraordinary circumstances. So these extraordinary have been made really extraordinary, like in a war or a famine and so on, or extraordinary price rise, which is defined as only when there is a 100% rise in retail price when horticulture produce is concerned, or 50% rise in retail price for non-perishable compared to the previous year's price or the average of 5 years. Now, this is a threshold which is actually very difficult to meet. So which means that actually the government will never have the power, or very rarely would it have the power to intervene and place any restrictions on the on the stocks and so on. And it has a further exemption for big companies which have a lot of processing capacity or which export, right? For example, so Adani company would never hit the stock limit even under the extraordinary price rise condition. So this is basically what the government is doing, is it had certain powers under the act, which it is giving up. And it is giving up for the sake of the corporates, not for the sake of the farmers. So what does it imply? The implications for the agribusiness is basically that they don't have no stock limits, they don't have restrictions, which means that they can actually establish bigger storage chains, which means that they can actually control the supply and market to a much larger extent than what they are. The big companies, especially like Adani Wilmar, which is a multinational company, or Reliance, or now Walmart has made agreements with Reliance. Now Amazon is coming into food retail in India. They've made agreements with companies like Heritage and so on. So essentially, what is happening is that multinational companies are entering the food business in a big way. This is actually opening doors to them. And many of them also have lands in other countries. Like many of the companies are owning lands in Africa, which are also producing tur dal and other pulses. So once there are no restrictions on stocking and so on, they can freely move their stock, whenever they and they actually can stock to whatever extent they want, and they can release into the market whenever they want. So it is all to the advantage of big players, essentially. And you can see that Adani, for example, invested about 3,500 crore rupees recently in an SEZ in Bangladesh, which basically does processing of pulses and oil seeds. All these business investments are being made, and now the way is being cleared for those things to make unlimited profits, right? But what does it mean for the farmers? I mean, maybe it benefits agribusiness as well as farmers, right? But actually, for the farmers, it doesn't change their holding capacity. So the kind of a situation that a farmer like Lalitama is stuck, where the farmer is immediately forced to sell after harvest, this does nothing to change their situation. So they are immediately forced to sell, and now these bigger companies are lining up to buy, and they set the terms in the market. And so it becomes stronger. It reduces the bargaining capacity of the farmers vis-a-vis the agribusiness. So their interests are actually conflicting. And once the market domination by agribusiness happens, then the farmer prices may very well become lower and not higher. Secondly, it also indicates that the government is now giving up on improving the farmers' holding capacity. See, the earlier the government's rhetoric was that we'll improve infrastructure, we will increase the cold storages, we'll provide more storage capacity, we'll promote FPOs, we'll do build processing units for FPOs and so on. Now what it is saying is that Adani, Ambani, and Walmart and all, they will do all that. You know, they will invest much more in infrastructure, which means the government is actually withdrawing from that responsibility. And now once they invest, it is not at all clear that actually any benefits will pass on to the farmer. In fact, the opposite may happen because it will be a market domination by a few multinationals. And this is something that we've already seen, you know, in the US and other countries. Basically, once the agribusiness starts dominating the agriculture policy, then the small farmers are driven out of agriculture. So this is the essential implication. Comment. Now about APMC Market Act, Bypass Act, Professor Ramakumar has already gone into detail. Essentially, says creating two markets. One is within the APMC market yard, and the other is the trade area, which is outside the APMC market yard. Within the APMC market yard, the traders have to pay the cess, market cess, which is used for infrastructure development. And they also are subject to the regulation within the APMC mandis. Whereas outside the mandi, they are not subject to any regulation. They are not responsible or answerable to any of the agriculture officers or the market committee and so on. And they don't have to pay market fees. So the implication basically is that the traders would obviously start purchasing much more outside the market yard. The government says that we are not closing down the APMC market yards. The states still have the option of maintaining them. However, they are actually crippling them, which means that within 3 or 4 years, they may be actually closed, or many of them may have to shut down, or their operation will become much more limited. Outside the APMC, it's an unregulated market as per the new act. So therefore, actually, there is nothing to protect the interests of the farmers. Basically, the APMC market yards, while the government rhetoric tries to make it as a villain, that market yards are somehow stifling the freedom of the farmers to sell. Actually, APMC market yards were brought in due to the demands of the farmers that they need a space where they get a fair market, where a fair auction can happen, so that a good price can be set. Right. So now, while moving away from that and not putting any other regulation in the outside market yard transactions, actually farmers are being left to fend on their own vis-a-vis the traders or the agribusiness corporations. So, which means outside the mandis, actually it becomes very unregulatable. So the fact that farmers can sell in their own local area without having to carry to some distant mandi doesn't mean that they will get a better price. Because if only one trader comes to your village to buy, then you are forced to sell to that trader. If true traders come, but they have an agreement beforehand that they are not going to offer any price above a certain price, still the farmers will not get. So the difference between an open auction in a mandi, which happens, versus no open auction, but just a private trading between the farmers and the corporations or the companies, basically leave the small marginal farmers with very little bargaining capacity. So this is basically the problem with the APMC Bypass Act or the Mandi Todo Kanun. And just want to say that, as a farmers organization, we also deal with many problems with the APMC market yards. We are always fighting against any trader nexus that happens within the market yard, any trader malpractices. For example, there's a cotton market yard in Adilabad. This is a picture from yesterday. The cotton which got wet because of the heavy rains. In the market yard, the farmers have a facility to dry it. And then when the moisture machines are used to test the moisture in the cotton, if there is any problem with that, the farmers there can actually bring it immediately to the notice of the market committee and get it set right, which is something that those kind of interventions, farmers organizations like ours do on a weekly or monthly basis in many of the market yards to protect the interest of the farmers. So there is a space for intervention by the farmers, a collective intervention by the farmers. Now, if this space is not there, you can imagine, let's say in a tribal area in the current context, Actually they are most exploited because they don't have access to an open market yard. Therefore, they are forced to sell. They get cheated in the weight, they get cheated in the grading, they get in the and also the price. This is what happens when bodies. And we already have a picture of that. It's not just guesswork. Now, for example, in Bihar.
Kiran, sir, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I think we just have a very little time. Maybe
Okay.
about 2-3 minutes to close, because there are also a lot of questions that I think the audience would like to take from you.
Right. Yeah, I think to complete my picture, it will take me about 5 minutes, but I'll do it quickly. Basically, I just want to put this slide that we already have an experience, from Bihar, where the APMC market yards have not been, have been set aside since 2006. So we have 14 years of experience where the Bihar farmers were told that now you are free from the clutches or the shackles of the APMC mandi. You can sell wherever you want and you'll actually get a better price in the market. But the experience is that Bihar farmers get the lowest prices anywhere in the country, whether it's for paddy or it is for maize. So I put up these figures for the last 3 years. They get about 25 to 30% below the MSP, even for paddy, where actually most of the farmers across the country get a better price close to the MSP. If you go and ask the Bihar farmers, why are you getting such low price? What they will say, what they say is that we don't have mandis, therefore we are getting poor prices. Whatever the trader comes and gives, that's what we have to sell. If I have to, I have to go to every kilometers, therefore we don't have. So basically what the farmers need is that they need access to more mandis, not less mandis. In fact, last year, the same government actually came up with a promise in 2018 in their budget that they will promote 22,000 rural hearts, which are currently there, which are small village, operate only 2 or 3 days a week. We will upgrade all of the 22,000 rural hearts into better market yards. So that is something which is welcome for the farmers, but removal of the existing market yards is not. So government actually is going back from its own promises. Contract farming, like Ramakumar has already said, it's a very unequal situation where the government needs to weigh in on the side of the farmers and put in regulation in place, which this act fails to do. And I just want to point out that actually there is a policy zigzag, from the same government. In the, let's say, 2014 election time frame, they promised that they will increase MSPs, they will ensure that every farmer gets MSP. Once they came into power, they basically did not increase the MSP. They started undermining the FCI and so on. Kumar committees talked about closing FCI and MSP and procurement. They filed an affidavit in the Supreme Court saying that it's not possible to raise the MSP. But once the farmers started 2017 onwards, they then started talking about we will raise the MSP, we will increase the market yards and so on. They brought in a PM Asha scheme. Now, once again, they are going back to their rhetoric of 2014-2017. That they brought these ordinances. They are saying that the government will step back from their responsibility and give freedom to the corporates to do their job. So what is to be observed here is that when they need the farmers' votes, they are actually promising certain policies, which is roundabout elections or when there are big protests from the farmers. But once they get into power, they are actually paying back the corporate masters. A policy framework where the corporates have freedom to dominate the agribusiness and the food sector. So this is the larger picture of the 3 acts. I just want to end by saying that the farmers require basically better government support and intervention to ensure the MSP, and these acts should be repealed. And you need to bring in a new act which actually guarantees a MSP. Once the government declares the MSP, for it to be meaningful, it should be guaranteed to all farmers. And we have actually, on behalf of AIKCC, framed a bill which does exactly this, which basically says that in any market yard, the floor price of all the auctions, any contract, the floor price should be MSP. You can have a contract above MSP, but you cannot have a contract below MSP. And then there should be effective market intervention budget outlays for that. So this guaranteed remunerative MSP Act is actually what the farmers have been demanding. So in the in the protests that are happening across the country, also they are saying repeal these three acts, bring in a remunerative MSP Act, and then of course you address all the other structural issues which are there. The dealer credit nexus, access to institutional credit, recognizing tenant farmers and women farmers, a disaster relief system, and so on. So bring in these structural changes, bring in a price support system which actually really works for farmers, and repeal these three acts. This is what the farmers of the country require. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I just have this one question by Shivangi Mishra, and she's asking, what will be the effect of these amendments to the common people? Does these amendments lower the cost of agricultural products for the ultimate consumer?
No, that's a good question. So basically, where the interests of the consumer get directly affected is in the Essential Commodities Act. By removing foodstuffs from the Essential Commodity Act, basically what the government is doing is it is giving up its power to intervene when things become too expensive for the consumers. It was using this this act for sometimes intervening in the using the Essential Commodities to act to bring down in specific commodities. It could be onions, it could be pulses, and so on. Now the government is actually removing its own power with this amendment. So which means that in the future, the government will not have that instrument to protect the prices of the consumer. So that is one thing. The other thing I would like to say is that, see, when farmers demand better price for their produce, it would mean that to a certain extent, that price rise does get passed on to the consumer. So as farmers organizations, as well as people who are working for the poor and welfare of the people in general, we are saying two things. One is that food security, expanded food security basket, which includes not only wheat and rice but also pulses and oil seeds and so on, should be the right of people, and we strongly support the food security system and expanded food security system. So the poor should have access to a minimum, amount of food at a minimum level of expenditure. So that is something that we totally support. However, the responsibility or the onus or the burden of providing food security to the entire nation should be borne by the entire nation, not by the farmers. Who are already, 92% small and marginal, who are really bearing the brunt of the economic crisis. So therefore, you provide food security system, an expanded food security system, however, to the farmers. So this is what we are saying.
Thank you, sir. I have a question for Professor Kumar. And here the question is, what is your opinion on states like Punjab and Rajasthan trying to bypass the reforms by passing laws in their assembly that essentially nullify the act? Is it a legitimate means of protest, and will it hold in the court?
Okay, it's a slightly complex matter, and there's no straight answer to that, because let me put it this way. If you ask me, do the states have a right to pass a law which will stand above the Central Act? It's a legal question for the following reason. If the states already have an APMC Act, and that APMC Act was signed by the President at some point in history, and the center has brought a new law now, and any court of law could very reasonably hold that the state law or the central law stands repugnant of the state law because it is a matter in the exclusive list of the states. There's a state list, entry 14, and hence only the state law will prevail. At best, they may prevail together, not one on top of the other. So if the state wants to, state already has a law which says that mandi tax will be collected from the notified area, despite the Central Act, mandi tax may have to be paid by the by the private market to the concerned Mandi board. The question that you are asking is regarding a bill that has been brought now. Now, that bill will become an act properly only when the president signs it, right? And I do not think that the president will sign it. That's a problem that we have. The president is a rubber stamp of the government. He's unlikely to sign it. That's a problem. That's a practical problem that we will face. The second problem that I want to bring to your attention is, see, what is MSP? MSP is not a legal mechanism. MSP is an administrative mechanism, which is a fact. Now, if you want to make it a legal mechanism, then there is a small, I'm completely with the spirit of the argument that people should get MSP, no doubt about it. That should be de facto the floor that farmers get. But can it be de jure the price that farmers get? I'm a bit hesitant to say that with full confidence, because the MSP is primarily a mechanism that exists in the country with regard to procurement by the government or purchase by the government. And that is absolutely fine as long as the government is involved in procurement. But if a private trader is involved in purchase from a farmer based on a mutually agreeable contract, can we say that MSP should prevail in that private contract also? There is a problem there. There's a problem there because the whole meaning of MSP completely changes. MSP was installed for a particular purpose. Now, this is a different use that it is being put into. So an administrative matter, when given a legal dimension, creates complications in the marketplace, which has to be dealt with. And experience shows that when you insist that traders should pay an MSP and not below that, it creates enormous amount of problems in the marketplace. Maharashtra, for example, had a law some time back, which led to traders going on strike, and the government had to withdraw it because the trader is not like the government. The government has food subsidy, but the trader has his or her own costs and margins, which nobody is going to reimburse for that trader. So how will that trader get compensated for that cost and margin if it is insisted that an MSP should be paid by a private trader also? This, when you make it a law, it has to be also thought about as to how it will actually work in the marketplace. That has not been quite thought about, is my personal opinion in this matter. And the bills that you spoke about, Rajasthan, Punjab, etc., those governments have brought out bill or acts which primarily insist upon MSP being an additional component being paid, the MSP being a minimum price that should be paid in all contracts. May it be a trader or a contract, MSP should be the price that should be insisted upon. Now, while I completely understand and appreciate the spirit and politics of that demand, I'm a bit suspect as to how it will work out in the marketplace outside the government procurement system. So I'm a bit reluctant to fully say with confidence that that will actually work out in the interest of the farmer as an outcome. So that's my problem with the Punjab, Rajasthan kinds of bills. That is, I don't think that the president will sign it, so it will never become a reality. Number two is, I don't know how it will work out in the marketplace, given there are costs and margins for traders and contractors involved. Number three, most, including the Punjab bill, for example, it's a rice wheat bill. Okay. In fact, that state act very clearly states in Punjab that it is applicable only for rice and wheat. But how about the 23 other crops for which MSPs are declared by the government? Why are they not covered in the state bill or state act? So basically, it in some sense locks that state back into a rice wheat system and does not allow the farmer to go out to other crops and take advantage of the same act, which has been passed supposedly in the interest of the farmer. So there are a lot of these complications that will be involved in the legal sense, in the economics of the marketplace, and in the choices that the farmer makes when these acts are put into action. I'm a bit suspect about how it will work out, But my first option in all this will be try to go to the Supreme Court and get these 2-3 acts declared unconstitutional. That is the best possible outcome that we can hope for. I strongly believe that these are completely violative of the federal spirit of the Constitution. The central government has no business getting into what our states has, and a case should be filed to declare these 3 farm acts ultra vires of the Constitution. Number one. All the rest are suboptimal measures that you can look at, and the state acts included are all suboptimal measures. And in those suboptimal measures, you will run into a lot of legal, economic, and other kinds of difficulties, which I just try to outline. So this is my rounded view of what the states are trying to do with their own acts. As you can see, I'm a bit suspect. I'm a bit hesitant to go into the top gear in support of those legislations, but I understand the politics of it. I understand the spirit of those legislations, and I respect the right of the state governments for having done that, even if it is only politically symbolic. I respect that and I appreciate that.
I would like to add on that, Dr. Soma.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd like to add on that. So basically, I think as far as the state government's acts are concerned, each of the states have done something slightly different. So Punjab, especially, I think what Punjab has done and what Chhattisgarh has done are two very different things. What Punjab has done is they have actually adopted an amended version of the the Centre's Act, saying that this is the amended version that we will apply in our which directly requires a president's assent, because if you're amending a Centre's Act to implement in your state, then it requires a president's assent. And the president is not going to give it. So actually, I think it is a doomed thing, just legally, practically speaking. What Chhattisgarh has done is something different. They have amended their own APMC Act to say that we are notifying the entire state as an APMC. Essentially, that is what it means, that the APMC regulation will apply to areas which are outside the mandis also, because we are notifying the entire area also to come under the APMC. Now, I don't think this act constitutionally requires a president's assent, because it is being done on an area which is entirely in the state government's ambit, in the state list. So definitely it requires a governor's assent, and there may be some politics, but in general, once the legislature passes it and there is no constitutional issue there, the governor is actually required to give assent to the state legislature's act. This is my interpretation of it. I mean, from the legal constitutional point of view, that APMC Act amendment that Chhattisgarh passed has actually a better chance of standing. But of course, in practical terms, it actually contradicts what the center is trying to do using its APMC Bypass Act. But in the APMC Bypass Act, it is doing it under the trade and commerce provision of union list, not the agricultural markets. So then these two acts will then have to fight it out. So ultimately, it will have to end up in the court. When but the thing is that it's basically the shoe is on the other foot. Now the center will have to challenge Chhattisgarh State Act in the Supreme Court. This is my interpretation of it. Whereas I think Punjab's Act basically doesn't have any chance of standing. As far as the guaranteed MSP is concerned, I totally understand the concerns that Professor Ramakumar is raising, and especially I think that the Punjab's Act, which talks about the MSP, I think it is not being done. Taking care of legal issues also. But I think the bill which the AKCC has made actually is more nuanced about requiring the MSP, and essentially it puts the onus on the government to ensure that the MSP reaches, which means that the primary, it can use various mechanisms, and the primary mechanism that the government would have is to actually do a market intervention. whenever there is whenever the price falls below the MSP, and then basically the government becomes in the market, why you're not doing the market intervention. I think definitely it is a tricky area, but I do think that the AIKCC bill, which has been drafted with a lot of legal inputs, including constitutional lawyers, actually stands a chance of actually being implemented legally. Of course, it will have economic impact, like he's saying. There will be an impact on how the market would function, and there will have to be certain implications which have to be thought about. But when we have spoken to traders also, basically what they say is that, essentially because much of the agriculture market in India is still domestic, the export is only a small amount of it. What traders tell us is, if the same MSP is made as a floor price in the entire country, then we don't have issue. If it is made in our state and it's not in the neighboring state, then our whole market, in terms of what is the price at which we'll be able to sell it, gets determined by the price in the entire country. Guarantee or restriction or making MSP as a floor price in a single state will definitely not work. But what they say is that you make it in the entire country, then we are fine. It just means that we'll have to sell at a higher price, but then everybody also will else will have to sell at the same price. The issue would then come with the import-export thing, which has to be dealt with. Yeah. So, like I said, it is something with complications. But it is something which we see as a legitimate political demand, and let the system work out the complications.
Thank you, Mr. Kiran Kumar. Such a brilliant panel, and with the three powerful speakers. Because of the paucity of time, I think it's now time to draw curtains. I have three more questions in the chat box, but I would request Sundar to kindly just put it in the mail so that we could get the answers from the three speakers. Over to Sundar to draw curtains, but not before thanking all the speakers. Professor Ramakumar, thank you so much. That was such a brilliant session. And like we said, you just lay bare everything. So, we don't really have to look at any literature anymore to know about the farm bills. And Kiran Kumar, you also, it was such a grassroots level, and you told us about this, and that was a huge, such a brilliant session, so comprehensive. Thank you so much. It has just left us asking for more, and I would request Sundar and the committee members, probably we should have more such dialogues, and once again, a compliment to you. Sundar, over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much for taking the time out to share your perspectives in that session. I think a very common misconception is that any stance in favor against the farm bills, against the introduction of them, is supposed to be a stance in favor of the status quo prior to the introduction of the farm bills. But I think this event has successfully proven that there's a sea of alternative regulation that movements did exist and revolve around that have been subdued by the introduction of these legislations. And I thank you so much for fruitfully explaining what your perspectives have been. There is a recording of the event, so anyone who's attending this event, I suggest that you circulate the recording and inform more people about all the discussions that we have covered in the purview of this event. Over the vote of thanks, we would like to convey our sincere gratitude to Dr. Father Benny Thomas, the Director of School of Law, Christ deemed to be University, Dr. Jaidevan S. Nair, the Dean of School of Law, Christ deemed to be University, our faculty coordinator, Ms. Pavitra R., and the management at large. Further, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Sapna S. for moderating the session. We express our sincerest gratitude to the panelists, Professor R. Ramakumar, Dr. Soma KP, and Mr. Kiran Kumar Vissa for taking the time out of their busy schedules in what is currently an extremely busy sector to share their insights with us. I majorly thank the public policy group of Nalsar, who have been very efficient in collaborating with us and have been very instrumental in hosting the webinar. I thank my co-convener, Anaga Bharadwaj, and the rest of the Public Policy and Governance Committee. Finally, I thank all the people who've rightfully taken the time out to attend the session on a Saturday and can hopefully turn away from the devices gaining more insights than they previously had. That being said, I think we can wrap the session up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.